Well, thank you for that introduction. It's always a pleasure to come to Ottawa, and I'm very grateful to Crime Prevention Ottawa and Public Safety Canada for arranging this event. I hope you'll all enjoy it and learn something from it. As Chantal said, I worked for the Solicitor General for a year, as a result of which I am the recipient of a very generous Canadian pension of $26 a month. So I am a Canadian pensioner. I'm going to talk today about preventing the transition from juvenile delinquency to adult crime. Can we have the next slide, please? And I'm going to talk about three topics. First of all, the conclusions of a US National Institute of Justice study group on transitions from juvenile delinquency to adult crime that I chaired with Rolf Lober. Secondly, I will talk about some effective interventions to prevent juvenile offenders continuing to offend into adulthood. And thirdly, I'll talk about policy implications. In particular, should there be special policies for young adult offenders? And I will argue that you should have special policies in Canada because nothing changes dramatically at the 18th birthday. Basically, young adult offenders from 18 to 25 share many of the characteristics of juvenile offenders, and they should be treated in similar ways. So I think in Canada there should be special provisions for young adult offenders. This is just showing the study group book that was published, From Juvenile Delinquency to Adult Crime. So here are some of the key questions that we addressed in our study group. We were interested about persistence and desistance from offending between adolescence and early adulthood, and also the onset of offending during early adulthood, why it happened. Obviously, we're interested in what explains persistence from juvenile years to the adult years in offending, and what explains the onset of offending. We're interested also in the extent to which the criminal career mapped onto the change to the minimum age of adulthood, which was age 18 in most US states, and of course 18 in Canada. Again, we're interested in saying, does something really change at age 18? And actually the answer is no, it doesn't. And so that was our next question. To what extent can the minimum age for adult court of 18 be justified by reference to human development and its causes? We were very concerned with legal and judicial issues, such as whether the legal boundaries are really related to young people's development of cognitive control or lowered impulsivity, and as I mentioned already, whether there should be special provisions for young adult offenders. And we're very interested in the effectiveness of interventions, for example, family-based programs in childhood, the extent to which they can reduce offending during the young adult years. Also, how effective are interventions with older juvenile delinquents, ages 14 to 17, in preventing continuation into young adult offending. We're interested in other interventions, such as labour market interventions, and the relative effectiveness of the juvenile and criminal justice systems, because, of course, in Canada and in many US states, there's quite a lot of translation of juveniles into the adult criminal justice system, provisions for juveniles to be dealt with as adults. And we're very interested in financial benefits and costs in these straitened times. We'd like to know that interventions save more money than they cost, and we obviously want to have the most effective interventions, but also the most cost-effective interventions. We looked a lot at offending careers, particularly between ages 15 and 29. We concluded that the prevalence of offending generally peaks around age 15 to 19 and then decreases. The peak is later for more serious crimes such as violence. There's increasing seriousness of offences in the young adult years when you get more homicide, violence, drug dealing and gun carrying, but there's decreased specialisation in offending with age and decreased co-offending and no sharp change in offending patterns on the 18th birthday. So 18 is an arbitrary cut-off point. So I'll now talk a bit about possible explanatory factors for persistence. We considered individual differences in self-control. We know they change with age. Behavioural risk and protective factors, environmental risk and protective factors. We considered brain maturation and cognitive changes, mental illnesses and substance use, and the effects of life events such as getting married, becoming employed, and contextual changes, including situational and neighbourhood context, basically moving, and also we focused on the justice response to offending. So this is to do with risk factors. We looked at a lot of predictors of reoffending by juvenile offenders, and we were helped by Bob Hogue, who was a member of our study group. Obviously, he's from Ottawa, and so he just shows some of the main predictors of reoffending based on the YLS-CMI, prior offending history, drug and alcohol abuse, having an aggressive antisocial attitude, high impulsivity and low empathy, we know are predictors, poor school performance, poor peer relations, low family income and poor housing, coming from a criminal family, and parental conflict and poor child rearing. These are important because these are risk factors that we can try and target in intervention programs to reduce the persistence of offending into the young adult years. We've concluded that the number of risk factors increases with age, and it's likely that early individual differences play a role in the later probability of offending in adolescence and early adulthood. But in addition to the individual factors, we have risk factors in several other domains, namely family, peer, school and neighbourhood areas, emerging a bit later in childhood and adolescence that strongly contribute to the later probability of offending. So we have a lot of risk factors that we know influence offending that we can target in programs. Brain maturation, we focused on this. As people get older, external controls by adults diminish, so parents supervise less as children get older and punish children less. And what happens is that you have internal controls increase as the external controls decrease. And we think, based on research, that the stop and think systems in the prefrontal cortex in most children mature, but they don't mature until before early adulthood. They're not fully mature at age 18, and we concluded from this that programs to improve self-control can be effective. Yes, we studied neural development, and we concluded that there were massive changes that supported the development of mature internal regulation of emotions and behavior. The next bit is a bit technical, talking about an increase in synaptic connections, followed by pruning and synaptic elimination. Basically, the brain functioning improves, but it doesn't stop at age 18. It continues well into the 20s. Behavioral expressions. This is just an example of where you find an improvement in functioning up to age 25 at least. This is a study by Larry Steinberg and others where they found that from age 10 to age 25, you had improvements in the ability to plan ahead, in future time perspectives, that's taking account of the future, and in the anticipation of future consequences. So when you do various psychological tests of brain functioning, you find that people are still maturing at least up to age 25. Life transitions. We believe that successful transitions to normative adult roles are important in decreasing offending, particularly in early adulthood. And as the slide indicates, the period between adolescence and early adulthood is a time when major life transitions occur. People leave school, they get a job, they may start studies, they may have a stable, intimate relationship, although this doesn't seem to happen until after age 30 these days. They may leave home and they may move to another type of neighborhood. Actually, what's happened in the last 20 years is that adolescence has extended to age 30 because now many young people are still living with their parents up to age 30, whereas 20 or 30 years ago, people would be living independent lives in their early 20s. They would have a job, they would have a relationship, and they would be self-sufficient. Now they're not self-sufficient until 10 years later. So it seems almost as though adolescence is continuing up to age 30, and we should pay attention to this in the way that we deal with our young adult offenders, because they're no longer mature offenders as they might have been 20 or 30 years ago. They're much more immature offenders. Research findings indicate that successful transitions to adult roles in marriage, parenthood, employment, moving to a new neighborhood can reduce offending in adolescence and early adulthood, and also evidence that improving employability of young people can cause significant reductions in offending. So effective programs. This is the second topic. Let's say the first topic was summarizing some of the main conclusions from our study group. Second topic is to tell you a bit about effective programs for juvenile offenders. basically telling us about the programs that prevent juvenile offenders continuing into the adult years. And I've particularly reviewed the work of Mark Lapsey in 2009, because this is the best summary of programs. Mark Lapsey reviewed 361 research reports that reviewed an intervention delivered to juveniles aged between 12 and 21, well, not all juveniles, but young people aged 12 to 21, that were intended to have desirable effects on their subsequent delinquency. Positive effects does not mean increasing delinquency, it means desirable effects. Also, there had to be quantitative results reported for a comparison between a treatment condition and a control condition and a delinquency outcome measure. And also, in this review, the study had to be conducted in an English-speaking country and reported in English, so it didn't cover other studies. More than 90% of the studies were conducted in the United States, and the main outcome measure was the percentage of juveniles rearrested during 12 months after the intervention. Lapsey divided all these 360 reports into six broad types of interventions, and I'll explain what they are shortly. Surveillance interventions, deterrence, and disciplinary interventions, those three are not very effective, whereas the restorative, counselling, and skill-building interventions, they were effective in reducing offending. And basically what the percentages show, it shows the average reductions in recidivism from a 50% rate, which is quite common. So you'll see the last three, restorative, counselling, and skill-building interventions, reduce recidivism from 50% to 40% or less. And this is realistically the best that we can hope for in many studies, but it's very effective. And certainly if we translate this into a number of offences saved or a number of victims saved, it's very significant. So the first type of interventions broadly included as surveillance interventions. They're based on the idea that closer monitoring of the juvenile will inhibit reoffending. The main program is intensive probation or intensive parole, orientated towards increasing the level of contact and supervision. These programs often include additional services, but the surveillance component refers to the monitoring. These programs are not very effective, according to Lapsey's review. Then we have deterrent programs, dramatizing the negative effects of consequences of the behavior. The main program of this sort is a prison visiting program called Scared Straight, where juvenile offenders are exposed to prisoners who graphically describe the horrible nature of prison conditions to try to put them off offending. However, many experiments show that this program actually is harmful. The juveniles offend more after receiving Scared Straight than a control group of juveniles who don't receive it. And this is what a systematic review by Petrosino shows. So this program is actually harmful rather than ineffective. Then we have the disciplinary programs, where the idea is that juveniles must learn discipline to avoid reoffending. They have to have a structured regime, and the main types of programs are boot camps. Again, these are not effective. There was a systematic review by McKenzie which showed that boot camps generally are ineffective, but if they're combined with other types of treatment, such as cognitive behavioral treatment, they can be effective. Now we come to the first group of effective programs, the restorative programs. These programs try to get the juvenile to compensate to the victims or make some reparation via community service. There may also be direct reconciliation between victims and offenders. And there's two main intervention types: restitution, where there's financial compensation or community service, and mediation, where there's apologizing to victims, meeting with victims under supervision. And these may also include restitution. These programs generally are quite effective, the first effective group of programs. Counselling programs. Again, some of these programs are effective, especially mentoring. I think the evidence shows that mentoring is a very effective program, most effective really of these sorts of programs. But you have a number of different individual, family, group counselling programs that are effective. Peer programs don't seem to be so effective, and mixed programs sometimes come out as effective. But again, this is generally an effective group of programs, especially mentoring. And then we have the skill-building programs, where you have instruction, practice, incentives, and other activities aimed to develop skills that will help juveniles control their behavior and participate in normative pro-social activities, including behavioral programs, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very effective, social skills training is effective, challenge programs, academic training, job-related interventions. Again, these types of skill-building programs are effective. So what we've learned is that some types of programs are effective, some types of programs are ineffective or even harmful. Then we have a number of well-developed brand name programs, which I thought I'd just mention these 5: reasoning and rehabilitation, treatment foster care, functional family therapy, multisystemic therapy, and stop now and plan. So the reasoning and rehabilitation was developed by Robert Ross in Ontario, and it's trying to teach offenders to stop and think, trying to teach offenders to negotiate, how to respond to criticism, how to apologize, how to analyze interpersonal problems, how to consider various desirable options, to have critical reasoning, social perspective taking, to see the other person's viewpoint, to care about victims, to increase their empathy, and to have emotional control and anger management. So all this package of interventions are effective. I reviewed all the evaluations of reasoning and rehabilitation in 2008, and we found it was effective, especially when given in the community, more so than in the institutions. Treatment foster care also is an effective program. This is where you pay foster parents to look after delinquents, and the foster parents are trained to use behavior management methods to provide boys, usually with a structured daily living environment with close supervision and clear rules and limits. Again, a big effort is made to limit contact with other delinquent peers. And I just mentioned here the original evaluation of this program with chronic male delinquents, and the control group was boys in group homes, and the treatment foster care boys had lower official and self-reported delinquency in a 1-year follow-up. But again, one swallow doesn't make a summer, and there are many other evaluations of this program which have been reviewed by MacDonald and Turner and show that it is effective in reducing recidivism. Another effective program is functional family therapy, trying to change family contingencies to increase positive and decrease negative behavior, to modify family communication patterns, to be more reciprocal, consider alternative solutions to problems. Again, I mentioned the original evaluation, which showed that functional family therapy was effective in reducing offending, but again, we've had a lot of other evaluations showing this. Scott Henggeler, multisystemic therapy, another effective program. Family intervention to promote the parent's ability to monitor and discipline the adolescent. Also includes peer interventions to encourage pro-social friends, school interventions to enhance competence, and work generally with the family, the peer, and the school, not so much with the youth. Again, I mentioned one of the evaluations, of which there are many, because this is an interesting one, because there's a 23-year follow-up. Serious delinquents randomly assigned to multisystemic therapy or individual therapy, and Sawyer and Borduin followed up to age 37 and showed that the MST group had fewer felony arrests, 33% versus 55%, and fewer years incarcerated. So it saved a lot of money, and we have systematic reviews showing that this is effective. Then I thought I'd particularly focus on Leena Augimeri's program in Toronto, because I've worked on this myself. This is a program targeting boys aged 6 to 11 referred by police, based on skills training, problem solving, self-control, anger management, aiming to control impulsiveness. The program's called SNAP, which stands for Stop, Now and Plan. So the boys are trained to snap their fingers when they're feeling angry, calm down, take deep breaths, count to 10, then use coping statements, think what to do, to remain calm, say to themselves, this is hard, but I can do it, and plan effective solutions to interpersonal problems. It's a 12-week program. Groups of about 7 children meet for 90 minutes with a facilitator, and there's social skills, self-control, group discussion, modeling, behavioral rehearsal, role-playing, relaxation training, home practice exercises, and you have topics such as how to deal with anger, how to avoid trouble, how to deal with peer pressure, how to apologize, and also how to stop stealing. An evaluation by Chris Koegl and others showed that it was effective, and there are 2 independent evaluations by Ellen Lippman in Hamilton, Ontario, and Burke and Lober in Pittsburgh, which show that it's effective. I, with Chris Koegl, did a cost-benefit analysis of this program, which was published this year. We found that the program costs 4,641 Canadian dollars per boy on average in 2012 dollars. The effect size was between 0.2 and 0.4. That translated into an 18% to 33% decrease in offending. Our estimates had a range because the 0.4 was the immediate effect, the 0.2 was the long-term effect. And we estimated that the program saved between 1.25 and 2.29 convictions per boy between ages 12 and 20, which translated into saving $14,000 to $26,000 per boy when we took account of the types of offences that were saved, and we also had to discount because the savings were some years after the program. And so we came up with a benefit to cost ratio between 3 to 1 and 5.6 to 1. But convictions, we know, are only the tip of the iceberg of offending. So when we applied what we knew about the relationship between self-reported offending and convictions, we massively increased the benefit to cost ratio to 26 to 1 to 47 to 1. These are staggering figures suggesting that for every dollar you invest in this program, you save at least $26, at least if you believe self-reported offending, or you save at least $3 based on convictions. I thought I'd mention programs targeted on gangs because I was told there's a great interest in Ottawa in gang reduction programs. These are the 3 programs which I think have some evidence that they're effective. Gang resistance education and training programs. This is a school program, so it's a primary prevention program on the dangers of gang involvement, which includes cognitive behavioral therapy, social skills, refusal skills, conflict resolution. Aggression replacement training is typically with older delinquents. It's a 10-week program including anger control and moral reasoning, and what's now called cure violence. You have violence interrupters working on the streets to prevent conflicts becoming violent, changing community norms and working with high-risk individuals. So we have some effective gang programs, and these are 3 of the best. Now we come to the final topic of policy recommendations. We start off by saying, why do we have special treatment for juvenile offenders? And there are many good reasons for this, because juveniles, we know, have less mature judgment, poorer decision-making, poorer executive functioning and reasoning and abstract thinking and planning. We know they're more influenced by immediate desirable consequences than longer-term, possibly undesirable consequences. We know that they have poorer impulse control, they're more likely to take risks, they tend to commit crimes for excitement rather than according to a rational choice. They're less set in their offending habits, more changeable. They're less culpable or blameworthy, they have diminished responsibility, they deserve punishment less, they have poorer self-regulation and emotion regulation, they have lower adjudicative competence to communicate with lawyers and make legal decisions, and they're more susceptible to peer influences. So, actually, we know that young adult offenders are rather similar to juvenile offenders in many of these ways, and therefore we recommended that there should be special courts for young adult offenders that might be established on an experimental basis with a focus on rehabilitation rather than retribution. We also know that juveniles who are transferred to adult courts tend to receive more severe sentences and tend to have higher recidivism rates. So we expect that these special courts would cause a decrease in recidivism and a decrease in incarceration, and also we thought they'd save money. We also thought there should be special correctional facilities for young adult offenders, including programs such as cognitive behavioral therapy, drug treatment, restorative justice, mentoring, education and vocational training, and work release programs. And we know there are special facilities for young adults in some states, such as Pennsylvania, but usually once you're 18, you're all together, which is we thought was highly undesirable. And we know that juveniles sent to adult correctional facilities have higher recidivism rates than those in juvenile facilities. Therefore, we thought that the special facilities would cause a decrease in recidivism and again save money, even taking account of the cost of special programs. We also thought there might be a youth discount for young adult offenders, a decrease in the severity of their penalties to take account of their juvenile-like lesser culpability and diminished responsibility. And this is a more specific to the US recommendation. We recommended death sentences and life without parole should be abolished for young adult offenders. We also recommended there should be risk, needs and maturity assessments and screening of young adult offenders to guide the selection of appropriate disposals. Again, there's a lot of assessment of juveniles, but very little assessment once people are 18. And we thought that young adult offenders with substance use problems should be diverted to drug courts, and those with mental health problems should be dealt with by mental health professionals. We thought there should be evidence-based programs for young adult offenders in the community and after release, including multisystemic therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy, drug treatment, restorative justice, mentoring, educational and vocational training programs, and communities that care, which I don't want to talk about today. Employment and relationship programs we thought were desirable, and other programs to reduce what we call disorderly transitions, such as not graduating from high school and single teenage parenthood. And also we thought other useful programs were those that tried to reduce opportunities for offending, such as hotspots policing, situational crime prevention, and programs aiming to reduce gang membership and drug dealing targeted on high crime neighbourhoods. So our conclusions: we concluded that the evidence, especially from developmental and neuroscience, suggests that in many respects young adult offenders aged 18 to 25 are more similar to juveniles than to adults in individual factors such as executive functioning, maturity, impulse control, risk-taking and decision-making focused on immediate rather than future consequences. However, we felt that there was a great need to develop screening instruments that measured brain maturation and executive functioning. Again, we thought a policy option was to increase the minimum age for adult court from 18 to 21 or older. And interestingly, there was a Dutch study group on the same topic, also chaired by Rolf Lober, and as a result of the Dutch study group, in 2014, the Netherlands increased the minimum age of adult court to 23, so our mirror image study group had a big impact in the Netherlands. So we believe that our recommendations offer more hope and more crime reduction and financial benefits than does the implementation of longer prison sentences for young adults in the adult criminal justice system. We urge the US federal government to develop an action plan to implement our key recommendations to assist states in changing statutes and practices so that justice is applied more fairly and with more knowledge of how youth develop into mature adults. We thought that these initiatives should be rigorously evaluated and that cost-benefit analyses should be carried out. It was important to study age, gender, and racial and ethnic differences in the effectiveness of programs. Interestingly, our report is having some effect. In September 2015, a National Institute of Justice report on new thinking in community corrections was launched in the Great Hall of Justice in Washington, D.C., proposing new ways of dealing with young adult offenders aged 18 to 24. So I think the US is already moving towards that, and we believe that our recommendations about young adult offenders are relevant to Canada. I think that Canada should also have special treatment for young adult offenders aged about 18 to 25. I think this will be more effective in reducing offending, in preventing victimization, and in dealing with young people in more appropriate ways. Thank you.